Good evening, everybody, and welcome to another one of our presentations as a part of the Berkshire High Peaks Festival. My name is Carolyn Regula, and I am going to be helping as host for tonight. This presentation, as well as this festival, is brought to you by Close Encounters with Music. All of our sessions are being recorded and will be live streamed on YouTube as well. Even after our master classes and lectures are done, you can still find them afterwards on the YouTube channel. Please consider supporting Close Encounters with Music and our ongoing festival. Our mission is to engage the imagination of diverse concert audiences in a welcoming setting, to connect listeners to performers and composers, foster the excitement and sense of community that live performance builds, and to establish a comfortable listening environment, turning performances into enriching education and artistically uplifting experiences. I will be including the donation link for Close Encounters in the attendees chat window. You can use this window throughout the talk to communicate amongst yourselves. If you have any questions for our presenter this evening, please use the Q&A window at the bottom of your screen. I will be monitoring that throughout the talk, and I will be pulling together questions for our presenter. We have an amazing lineup with student performers, and to welcome our guest, we have Yehuda Hanani. Take it away.
Thank you, Carolyn. Good evening to all our students and friends. One of these days, when I'm sure many of you will become teachers, you will find out that probably the most rewarding moment in the life of a teacher is that when students become colleagues. And we have on our faculty Serom Kwon, who is a leading cello faculty in Seoul, Korea, and she was in my class quite a few years ago. And tonight, it's a special pleasure to welcome Kivie, who is a brilliant cellist and a profound scholar of Baroque period, as well as specialist in cutting-edge contemporary music. So he does both ends of the spectrum, and he is here tonight to enlighten us and inspire us with his expertise. Welcome, Kivie.
Hi, thanks so much for having me tonight. As Yehuda said, I'm going to be talking about Baroque music. And the majority of the session is going to consist of a sort of masterclass. So I'm not going to talk for too long, but I'll talk for about 25 minutes and then take a Q&A. So in that 25 minutes, I have to cover about 160 years of music history and performance practice, which is obviously impossible. So instead, I just want to touch on a few things that I find particularly interesting and which many of you might not already know. So first, there isn't really one single thing called Baroque performance practice. And the reason goes back to what I just mentioned about 160 years of music history. The Baroque period was massive. Just to look at the dates, we often round up to it starting around 1600, but a lot of historians put the start of the Baroque at 1580 or 1587, which are the dates of important publications by Andrea and Giovanni Gabrieli. Sometimes we round down from 1602 or 1603, which were important publications by Caccini and Monteverdi. And for the end of the Baroque, we have this nice round number, 1750, which happens to be Bach's year of death. Sometimes we use 1759 for the death of Handel. But anyway, I like to use 1587 to 1750, and that's 163 years. So 163 years is the exact number of years between Bach's B minor Mass, 1749, and Schoenberg's Pierrot Lunaire of 1912. Bach to Schoenberg. And to scholars and specialist performers of Baroque music, the compositional styles of the earliest Baroque works and the latest Baroque works are really as different as the B minor Mass and Pierrot Lunaire. And the performance practices of, say, 1600 to 1750 are really as different as you might think to play Bach and Schoenberg, and as you would want to have to hear them. And realistically, the performance practices of, say, 1680 Vienna and 1680 Paris are probably even more different from each other than the performance practices of, say, Schoenberg and Ravel, who were writing at the same time as each other in Vienna and Paris. So we can't lump all Baroque music into one category, and we should be really mistrustful of any sources that summarize Baroque performance practice in a monolithic way, especially if they were written more than 50 years ago, which is when scholars really started to get a better understanding of what was going on back then. So here are a few interesting points about the Baroque era, and some of them are things that you would quickly learn if you study historical instruments. Some of them are also things that the historical performance people, you know what I'm talking about, they tend to whitewash them a bit. So I want to start with the notion of pitch. So you probably know that in Baroque music, we usually tune to A equals 415 instead of A equals 440. And just a quick explanation of that for the non-musicians who are watching. These numbers are referring to hertz, vibrations per second. So here's A on the piano. That's about 440 hertz. Here's A equals 415, give or take. So that's just about exactly a G sharp or an A flat on your modern piano. And that's the Baroque A that nearly all Baroque musicians tune to. What you probably don't know is that the notion of A equals 415 is completely anachronistic. Almost never did anyone in the Baroque actually tune to A equals 415, ever. So here's what happened. Most cities in that era had one big cathedral, and that cathedral had one big organ. And whatever size the pipes were of that organ, which depended on who built the organ and when and where, that determined the pitch of the organ. And because you couldn't easily change the pitch of the organ basically determined the pitch of the whole city. So many French organs in the mid 17th century, around the time of Lully, tuned their A to about here. About A equals 392. So we often say that Paris pitch in the Baroque was 392. Some organs in northern Italy, around the time of Monteverdi, tuned their A to about 465. So that was A, we call that Venice pitch sometimes. So there's a huge spectrum of pitches between about here and about there that we called A at the same period in time, depending on where you were. And sometimes it just varied locally, city to city. I recently played a concert of Scottish Baroque music, and in the Highlands, they didn't have organs at all, but they did have a fixed pitch instrument, which was the bagpipes. They had drones, you can't adjust them. And so anyone playing with the bagpipes has to tune to them. Bagpipes are usually tuned around A equals 480, something like that. So massively wide spectrum of A. In Germany, very often the city owns a set of instruments, and they were played by the town musicians, sort of on loan. And the big organ in that city might get replaced, but the town wouldn't necessarily purchase an entirely new set of other instruments. Or sometimes, in a bigger city, there might be two main organs, or even three. And these might have been built at different times by different people. So they might have two completely different A's, but there might still only be one set of municipal instruments. So we sometimes get weird situations like what Bach was dealing with when he was in Weimar, around 1714 to 15. The Himmelsberg organ there was tuned to Venice pitch, A465. The tuning forks and all the municipal wind instruments and brass instruments from Weimar in that time were tuned to A equals 415. So basically, a whole step apart. So Bach wrote organ parts in C major, and then other instrumental parts for the exact same piece in D major. And it sort of evened out. A lot of these parts survive. So crazy adjustments were happening at the time. So fast forward to the 20th century and the start of what's sort of the modern historical performance movement. These folks know that pitch in the Baroque era is all over the map, and they want to be historically accurate. But they also know they have to be practical. They can't, if they've got a concert of Lully followed by Monteverdi on the same half, They can't suddenly retune all their instruments from A equals 465 to A equals 392. So A equals 440 was a modern standard, and the historical performance folks felt like they needed their own. And pitch has been steadily rising since the Baroque era. It was mostly lower. It was mostly in the high 300s with the low 400s. And it was going higher and higher until the early 20th century. A lot of cities like Weimar and also Mühlhausen, where Bach was before Weimar, had a chamber pitch of A equals 415 if the organ pitch was 465. So they simply, the modern historical performance movement just sort of invented this imaginary pitch standard of 415. It set them apart from the Romantic players, but it also let them sort of tune to a piano transposed by a half step. And it gave them the option with transposing keyboards like harpsichords and organs. You can literally transpose by a half step. So it gave these players the option of switching rapidly from historical pitch of 415 to modern pitch of 440. But that historical pitch of 415 was completely just made up. And it's lasted all this time, even though it's made up. So that's one thing. Pretty much everything we know about Baroque performance practice comes from treatises, books about how to play music written by musicians of the time, and also a little bit from iconography, art of the period that shows musicians making music. And there are hundreds and hundreds of these treatises and countless surviving paintings of musicians from the Baroque era. These come from different countries, they come from many different generations by people who didn't know each other. So when they all agree, it's a pretty good sign that this was how things were usually. I'll give an example of when that isn't necessarily the case later. Sometimes there's a tidbit in one of these treatises that sort of shocks me because no one else wrote anything like it and no one plays that way today. And it makes me realize just how wrong we could be about everything if it were true. So here's an example. Joseph Joachim Quantz wrote the most important flute treatise of the late Baroque era. And here's a translation of one line. This is such common knowledge that it probably doesn't even bear mentioning, but music with a repeat in it should always be played faster the second time so that listeners don't fall asleep. If there's a repeat, you always just play it faster the second time, which made me go when I heard that, because no one does that. You're not going to find me one recording by anyone, a period performance practice player or a modern player or anyone who does that or does anything like that. And here's Quant saying that it was such common knowledge that no one's even bothering to say it. So that just sort of blew me away. We could be completely wrong about so much. Some stuff like this gets whitewashed. No one does that. And Baroque performers tend just not to talk about it. And I'm going to need that first video in a moment. Often we make the mistake of whitewashing not only performance practice about the music, not just yet, I'm just going to talk for another moment, not just the performance practice, but the music itself. And my research has focused on the music of 17th century Germany. I go through old manuscripts, sometimes they're written in weird notations, and I transcribe them, and my ensemble gives the first performances or recordings, the modern premieres. And in doing this, I've been sometimes amazed at these shocking dissonances that I'm finding in the manuscripts. And some of them might be misprints, but some of the dissonances are forced by the counterpoint. The composer's going out of their way to create the clashes, and in such a way that the performer can't even prevent it without causing what would be a worse contrapuntal error. So here's one example, a piece that I sort of rediscovered. It's a sonata in G minor for 5 strings and continuo by Giovanni Valentini. And we'll play the first couple minutes of it. And this is just to get a sense of how crazy the dissonances could be in this era. You can follow along with the manuscript right here on this video. it's wild stuff. It's crazy. You've got this crazy chromaticism. You've got a passage that's functionally in 5/4 time, even if it's unmarked. You've got this chromatic line in the violin. And this Valentini guy, he was not some rando who no one had ever heard of. This was the Hofkapellmeister of the Holy Roman Empire for about 25 years. It was probably the single most important musical position in German-speaking Europe. So here's another one by a different Hofkapellmeister of Vienna about 50 years later, named Johann Heinrich Schmelzer. And here's the second video. And you can play a little bit more, or it doesn't matter. That's plenty. And here's one of my favorite passages of 17th century music by a composer named Bieber around 1670. Probably no relation to Justin, probably. He was trying to imitate the sound of a noisy tavern where drunks are singing a bunch of different songs all at once. But what you're about to hear is fully notated. I don't have the score up on YouTube, but you can hear it. It's fully notated exactly with the notes that you're hearing. And he wrote this in 1670. Here's the third video excerpt. So I hear music like that, and then I look at a bunch of old manuscripts of composers who feel like friends, Handel, Vivaldi, Bach, and sometimes I see notes in the manuscripts that don't make it into modern editions. Some editor, usually someone from the 19th or 20th century, said, well, that note can't be right because it doesn't sound Baroque. But what you just heard was Baroque. So when I'm exploring a piece from this era, I always want to start with the original manuscript, if it's available, just to make sure that I'm not playing a sort of sanitized 19th or 20th century version of the music. And a lot of that exists. Let me just give you one example. This is from Bach's second cello suite in the Sarabande. And you can put that up. So I'm going to play just from the, if you look at the second to last system, just the last two measures, this is what we're used to hearing. So you're looking right now at the Anna Magdalena Bach manuscript. This is the standard manuscript that nearly all modern editions claim as their source. You could go through 100 modern editions, and most of them, 98, 99 of them, maybe all 100, are going to say that Anna Magdalena Bach was their source. Look closely at that same passage, and I'm going to play exactly what she wrote. And the other sources for this music, the other 18th century sources, mostly, though not entirely, agree. So follow along again from the same place. Here's what she wrote. This stuff gets whitewashed. There are a lot of them just in the Bach cello suites. There's more in the sonatas and partitas. There's more elsewhere in some of the most famous music that we know from this era. It tends to get ignored by editors from the 19th and 20th centuries. And just now we're starting to look closer at the manuscripts and finding these little details. You can pull it off. So sometimes the Baroque treatises seem to disagree, but it turns out they disagree for a really good reason, and we can learn a lot from the disagreement. It often has to do with issues of when they were written and where they were written. So here's an example. If you're learning a Baroque dance suite, like one of Bach's cello suites, and you want to learn about the different movements, and you open an old manual on Baroque performance practice, you might read something like this. And I literally took this from a book from 1954. Courant literally means running. And the courant is a fast triple meter dance, usually felt in 1 beat per measure, often with harmonic changes on downbeats, sometimes with accents on beat 3. So that is totally accurate. It's supported by every treatise that you'll find from 17th century Italy. And so you might read that, and then you sit down to play the Courant from Bach's 5th cello suite, and you might play it something like this. So that sounds fine. It's fast, it's brisk, it's exciting. I love that. I love listening to it like that. Here's the problem. It's not remotely what Bach could have wanted, probably. The Courant changed based on national style. In Italy, it got faster and faster. And by Bach's time, it was sort of a perpetual motion dance. The Courant, which we often pronounce the Italian way, corrente, from the other 5 Bach cello suites, is that kind of Courant. In France, the Courant got slower and slower. And by Bach's time, it's even slower than the sarabande, which we usually think of as the slowest dance. Instead of being marked in 3/4 meter, it's usually in 3/2. It gets filled with irregular phrase lengths and lots of hemiola. Same name, completely different dance. And in Germany, where we often have Italian and French influences, sometimes we have to figure out which one is applying where. And when you look at the rest of Bach's 5th cello suite, everything about it is in French style. We've got a textbook French overture, French dotted allemande, French gigue with its sautillon rhythm, this characteristic French gigue rhythm, and this extremely French Courant, 3/2 meter, irregular phrase lengths, and harmonic motion. It's filled with hemiola. So this is a French Courant. We should play it in French style. And one other thing we know about French music from this era is they employed a thing called inégal, which basically means swing. Anytime you're playing stepwise motion, a scale, swing. So here's that same movement played after looking at French Baroque treatises from later in the Baroque. That's probably what Bach meant. When Bach wrote Courant in the context of a French dance suite, he's basically writing molto adagio, and he's probably writing swing. And all of this is known to any musician of Bach's time and place. But if you're not reading the right sources from the right era and country, you can get hopelessly confused. You get totally wrong information. And it just seems like the treatises are disagreeing. But still, most of the time, all these old sources do agree. And that's a pretty good indication that something is accurate. So I want to give an example of when that isn't necessarily true. A situation where all these treatises agree, but we sort of have to read between the lines. And this takes us to one of the testier issues of Baroque performance practice, which is vibrato. You probably know that most Baroque specialists don't use much vibrato. And this is one thing that every treatise of the Baroque era agrees upon. Vibrato was just an ornament. They used it, but sparingly, in special moments. And in fact, that's not just the Baroque era. Of all the string instrument treatises that mention vibrato, from 1600 until about 1900, meaning not just Baroque, the entire classical and Romantic eras as well. And there's a lot of these treatises. There's literally not one that suggests that vibrato should be more than an ornament. Some people have made arguments for continuous vibrato in the Baroque being historical, as I drop all my notes all over the floor. Excuse me. And those arguments totally fail. And really quickly, I just want to go through the two examples I've heard most often. The first example, many organs from that era have a vibrato stop, and it's usually called the tremulant stop. So people think that imitates the vibrato of singers and string players. The problem with that argument is that the tremulant stop on an organ isn't a pitch fluctuation like vibrato. So vibrato, in slow motion, the pitch is going up and down. The tremulant stop on the organ just goes in and out on a single pitch, like a portato, what was called in the Baroque a bowed tremolo. So it's not really a vibrato. And the other argument that you hear a lot is based on one treatise by a composer named Francesco Gemignani. And that sometimes gets selectively quoted out of context. Gemignani says that vibrato is very satisfying and should be made use of as often as possible. He actually wrote this treatise in England, in English. He was in England at the time. So the problem is, in that passage, Gemignani's not referring to vibrato on notes. He's talking about vibrato on rests, in between short notes, to imitate the ringing of a bell that's been struck. And he also says that trills and appoggiaturas are very satisfying and should be made use of as often as possible. So that's not a good argument. So anyway, every treatise, every single one of them agrees that vibrato is an ornament to be used sparingly. And there isn't really a good historical argument against that unless you read between the lines. And then suddenly you find a really good one. And that's the simple fact that every single treatise that mentions vibrato and discusses it goes out of its way to say that it should be used sparingly as an ornament. You've got generations of composers and performers who don't know each other, they're from different countries. They're all writing these treatises and they're all saying, never do this thing. It's a pretty good indication that there's a bunch of people out there who are doing this thing. And in fact, one treatise sort of says so explicitly, and it's written by Mozart's dad, of all people. Leopold Mozart is talking about vibrato, and he goes through the whole thing. We vibrate on short notes to imitate the ringing of a bell, and it's just an ornament. And then he writes, there are some people who vibrate constantly as if they have the palsy. So he basically said it. There were people using vibrato in the Baroque. This was just a question of taste and style. And the great musicians, including literally every one of them who wrote anything about performance practice in their time, thought that vibrato was ugly. But if you want to vibrate constantly in early music, I say go for it. And it's not inauthentic, and don't let anyone tell you it is. It's just that the composer probably thought it was in bad taste and wished that you hadn't. I see that I've already been blathering away for a while, and I want to have time for a Q&A, and I want to have time to hear the students. So I'm gonna stop there and invite any questions about this before we have this very short little masterclass. Are there any questions?
Yes, we actually have a couple of questions from our YouTube stream, which will give anybody on Zoom a time to type anything for me. But from YouTube, we have a couple questions. Where is the manuscript of Battaglia available?
Sorry, the manuscript of what?
Sorry. The manuscript of Battaglia. Battaglia.
Oh, Battaglia.
It might have been an accidental G in there. Okay.
No. Sometimes it gets spelled with a G. Sometimes not. Battaglia is. There are two, I believe, two surviving manuscripts. The one that I was looking at is from a collection in a Czech monastery, a Czech castle. I'm going to butcher the Czech pronunciation. It sounds something like Krmsch. Most people use the German translation of it, which is Kremsier, Kremsier. The Czech spelling is Kromeriz, and there's little Czech accents and thingies over various letters. And there's the Battaglia manuscript is there. Most of Bieber's manuscripts survive in that archive. He was there for some time, and he was in Salzburg for some time.
Great. And another question is, what would you recommend as a reference for composers to understand intonations in, quote, Baroque music?
So a lot of theorists to the medieval and Renaissance were writing about intonations, about different different temperaments, and I haven't gone through those mainly because I barely speak any German at all. I speak just enough that I can read it with the aid of a dictionary, and no Latin and Italian or French. So I've been mostly using sort of there's a bunch of modern sources that sort of make an aggregate of the various discussions about temperament and pitch in the Baroque era, and there are a bunch of different books on this. And being on the spot, I've forgotten the names of all of them. If I think of them in the next hour, I'll mention it again. But there are a number of really good books about temperament and pitch that could be useful for composers. I was going to maybe talk about temperament next, but I realized I was running over. But that might be something I mention later if more people want to hear about it.
And I don't see any questions right now, but I actually had one. Listening to this, it's so fascinating. I'm a cellist, so Bach suites, and I thought it was very interesting what you said about the fifth suite Courant and the tempo. Do you think Bach was aware of these practices at the time and made a specific decision because he wanted a slower tempo for that suite?
I think so. He wouldn't have written the Courant in 3/2 with all the irregular phrase lengths and hemiola if he didn't have the French style in mind, and the fact that every other movement of the fifth suite is in French style, whereas every movement of all the other 5 suites are in Italian style, is a pretty good indication to me that Bach is thinking very, very French in his Courant in this case. I don't think that I can't really rationalize it any other way if he's writing everything so French in the fifth suite. We don't have any way to know. But he was usually pretty careful to keep things within a national style. He doesn't title the fifth suite as being a French suite, but it sort of, it reeks of Paris.
We have a question from one of our vocal faculty, Danielle Talamantes. And she wants to know, what trends are you noticing in modern day Baroque performance practice? What is the modern conductor or group's preference when interpreting Baroque works?
Our tendency, I think, and this varies dramatically based on what repertoire we're talking about. Because like I said at the beginning, the difference between something from 1587 and something from 1750, it's just a different universe of music. Most of what we're hearing, the fact that you said conductor, sort of, we're looking at the late Baroque, I think. And most of what I'm seeing in the late Baroque is, we're seeing larger orchestras than they would have had. And I think we're seeing cleaner, not nearly as much sort of bizarre ornamentation. A lot of Baroque performers in that time were sort of just, they were all over the place. They were wildly ornamenting. They were shifting all over the place with, we know that they were using a lot of audible shifts. Everything was kind of crazy. And what we're getting right now are very clean, crisp performances. I think in general also our tempos are, in sort of the modern Baroque orchestras, they tend to be a little on the slow side, and part of that is just the size of the orchestra isn't, it's quite a bit bigger than it would have been. But I don't want to generalize also because there's so many different ensembles and so many different styles within this, within Baroque music. But if you ask more specifically, I might be able to answer a little better.
Okay, maybe we could turn to hearing some of our students, and maybe if more questions pop up, we could pause halfway maybe and address.
Terrific. We've got 5 students. And I warned them in advance, but I just want to mention to the audience, because there are 5, we can't spend too much time with any of them. I'm going to try to be good about moving on quickly, but this has nothing to do with, it's not, they're all going to be wonderful, and it has nothing to do with how they're playing. So looking forward to hearing, this is going to be, I think, the prelude of the 4th cello suite on viola.
Yes.
was great. No, it was terrific. This is, by the way, for the audience who don't know this piece, this is a really, really difficult movement. This is one of the hardest of the cello suites. It sounds like just a bunch of simple arpeggios, but it is so hard to tune and so hard to just so hard to play with any spirit at all because it just looks like a bunch of simple arpeggios. So really great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. I just want to start by highlighting a tiny little thing that, because I sort of alluded to this sort of thing earlier, a note that is really unusual in the Anna Magdalena, which sort of gets whitewashed. This one is probably a mistake, but it's so unusual and strange that it's worth mentioning.
Okay.
At the very end, we're leading back to our I don't want to use the word recapitulation because it's obviously not in the sonata form sense, but we're about to recap our opening. Here's what Anna Magdalena writes. I think it's a misprint. I think she just wrote an extra ledger line, but it's worth being aware that there's this weird thing here that sort of gets glossed over. But anyway, back to the beginning. I love your tempo. I often hear this movement played in a sort of like a slow 4 or even an 8. And the old sources have this in cut time, and you're playing this in a real cut time. And I really like that. Does your edition say cut time?
Yes, actually. Yeah.
Great. You're falling into a really common trap with this movement, and I hear this all the time. This has nothing to do with Baroque or modern. This is just a difficulty of playing it. So we're dealing with this really awkward string crossing. We have to do this crazy arm leap to get back to the A string. In the process of doing that, you're kind of playing this in 9/8. I'm getting a little bit of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You can get away with that once in a while, and I often do that myself very deliberately at moments of the bass note changing the chord to something important. And I think it's actually a really good way to highlight the harmonic shifts and the changing bass notes. But watch that it doesn't become sort of a weird affect.
Yeah.
And I hear this all the time. This is probably the most common problem that I hear with the Suite 4 Prelude. Start it one more time from the beginning, and then I'll move on from there. Great, really nice. That fixed a lot of them. You started bringing out that thing again as the bass note changed, and I think that pick and choose carefully. Don't let it become predictable. I think it's one of these movements that as soon as Bach gives us little nudges to prevent it from becoming predictable, little surprises here and there, where suddenly the bass note comes 1/8 note later, or suddenly we get 2 measures of a harmony instead of 1. He doesn't let us get settled, and I think you should try to help him with that.
Okay.
So we just hit the first cadence, and it felt like you relaxed a little bit before we got to that point. I'd love for you to hold the tension up until right up until we get there. Can you jump back to after the last measure of the E flat pedal, and then and try to hold the tension from the dominant, which we get 2 measures in a row. until the cadence point in B flat. I can tell you're thinking harmonically because you're phrasing it really beautifully with the harmony changes. I just want to bring it out a little more.
Sure. Right until.
Yeah, so right there.
Oh yes, to that cadence.
Yeah, so we've got, this is a, like a, what is that, a 5-6-5 or diminished 7 or something. I'm not doing a fast enough analysis. And then here's our 5-7. 1 of our new key, B flat major. Hold the tension through these dominants and diminished, or else we don't get the satisfaction of landing on our new tonic. And sorry to anyone in the audience who doesn't have the theory background to follow. What we're basically talking about is tension and resolution. The harmonic progression of these arpeggios is increasing in tension until finally it goes too far and we have to just relax into a new key area. And I will feel that more if she brings out the tension all the way up until that point. Try that one more time and then we'll go on.
Okay. Right until there.
Yeah, beautiful. Really beautiful. I loved that. We can do that a lot as these go on. This next phrase that you just hit it's really only 4 measures, and then we get another cadence. Can you start right on this B flat, right where you just hit? So harmonically, we're momentarily home in B flat. We've got it's the same chord, just with it's called a passing tone in the bass. This is usually D natural, by the way. I don't know if any of the old editions actually have a D flat. Here's the D flat, and there's our cadence in our new key, A flat. We're not going to stay there for long. But we get a full cadence there, and I think hold the tension. All the way until we get to that point.
To the E flat?
To the A flat. That's our cadence. We're cadencing an A flat major, and from there we're gonna move on. So we've got an E flat major, an E flat dominant. That's all of our tension for 2 measures in a row. First with the third in the bass, and then the root. And there's our cadence. We're relaxing into A flat.
Okay. Should I go from the B flat?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's great. I just got I just got a text that I'm running over, and so I should probably move on. You sound so good. I love your phrasing. Go through. You've got the theory background, I think, to go through if you haven't already, and figure out like you can literally just write in Roman numerals and figure out the pivot chords, and it's just gonna show you where all these phrases are. You're playing most of them really beautifully, and then there's a few where I wanted to sort of like pivot you a little bit earlier or later to bring out Bach's tension.
Sure. Yeah, that's definitely a good tip.
Yeah.
Yes.
Beautiful playing.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Are there any other questions come in, or should we have someone else play or sing in this case? I think.
Nope, no questions. You can move on to Camilla.
All right.
Hi, I'll be singing Non è si vago e bello from Giulio Cesare, which was an opera seria by Handel. This is a da capo aria sung by the character Julius Caesar, which was originally written for a castrati, but in this case, I guess it's a pants roll. Yeah, okay. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Si bello e vago il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto, quant'è vago e gentile, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto, il tuo bel volto. D'un fiore il pregio a quello solo vien dato, ma tutto un vago aprile, ma tutto un vago aprile è in terra raccolto, è in terra raccolto. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Non è sì bello e vago il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto, quant'è vago e gentile, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto, il tuo bel volto. For the interest of time, I'll stop it there. I think you're muted.
Thanks. Really beautiful. You already said the first thing I was going to say, which is just a little bit of historical context, that this is normally a castrato roll. This is Julius Caesar. What are you singing about? Who are you singing to?
I'm singing to Cleopatra. I don't know that it's Cleopatra because she's in disguise. This is still the first half of the opera, and this is essentially Caesar's first reaction to seeing Cleopatra.
So when I found out that this was going to be I'd never heard this aria before, and when I found out this morning that I was going to be hearing it, the first thing I did was look it up, and the translation is so weird. I don't know if you have one in front of you that you could.
It's really weird. I got it. My Italian's pretty good. I think so. First, it's non è si vago e bello. A flower is vague in its beauty. A flower in the meadow is vague. Your face is gentle and not vague. Basically, you're more beautiful than any flower in the meadow.
The whole thing is like that. It's this.
Right.
It's bizarre. He's not like he's like struck by how beautiful she is, but like what's coming out of his mouth is really strange. He's talking about vague flowers coming in April, and
Very weird.
yeah, and I listened to a couple recordings just to familiarize myself with it, and I heard basically what you sang, which is this beautiful lyrical melody, and then I found the urtext score, and I noticed the tempo indication. Do you have that in front of you? Do you have a tempo marking?
I have a score.
Okay.
Allegro.
So yeah, the urtext says allegro. And I think the piano accompaniment you were playing with just now, and every recording that I heard when I listened to a couple of them this morning, was very andante, maybe almost like a larghetto. It feels very, very gentle and serene and sweet, the way we would expect a love song to be. But there's seeing the allegro sort of matched with like the bizarreness of his text, where he's saying that she's vague like a flower, or the flower is vague. Like a piece of me wanted to hear this sort of like sung sprightlier. And again, this is where sort of looking first for like the historical context and like if I heard the song without knowing that allegro was there, I would think that what you sang was so beautiful, and I do think it was so beautiful. But it made me sort of yearn to hear different ideas with this one. So I know your accompaniment probably can't be sped up about 40 clips, but that would also solve the problem of that very, very long vago where you had to sort of breathe in the middle. If it's quite a bit faster, you can get from Non è si bello all the way to Nel Prato without having to take that extra breath. So that was my first thought, was just that I'd love to hear it at a faster clip. The main sort of, I'm not an expert in Baroque vocal ornamentation, which is very different from what we would get on violin or cello. The main thing that we would often hear in music of this time and place is wild ornamentation, especially on the second time around, and especially in like the big cadence leading into it. The cadence at the end of the B section. What's written on the page is it might you can go crazy. Add syncopations, add trills, add appoggiaturas. The little bit that I've read about opera seria and the sort of singers who were involved in opera seria, this was more in. I've read more about what was going on in Italy. I don't really know what was happening in England, but I imagine it was sort of the same. These castratos were a wild bunch. They're backstage doing all sorts of raunchy things, playing pranks, stabbing each other in the back, sometimes literally. And they would get on stage and try to one-up each other with the sort of craziness of their ornaments. And if we're treating this as a slow lyrical love song, we might not want to do as much of that. But if we take this at a real allegro, and it's Caesar being sort of I don't even know, just sort of odd in his attraction for Cleopatra, it might it might be an interesting direction to take it in. I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot and ask you to do something like that on the spur of the moment. But would you be up for
Yeah.
trying?
Absolutely.
Maybe you can try it at your tempo with the accompaniment, or try it without the accompaniment.
I'll
But
try it without the accompaniment, I think.
try it without at whatever you feel like allegro would be. If I were looking at this bass line and I saw allegro. Which takes you at a totally different tempo. I don't even know how much, but anyway, try something. I'm just curious to hear what'll come out.
Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. I guess I should have asked if we were doing it from the
It was fine.
second
It was great.
repetition or...
It was great. That was I love that. Try now the second time around and see and mess with some ornamentation.
Okay.
To me, this is already it's sounding like it. I don't know. I like it. Your voice teacher might hate it, but that's okay.
Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto. Non è sì vago e bello il fior nel prato, quant'è vago e gentile il tuo bel volto.
I love it. The more experimenting with ornamentation you do, the crazier it can get on that second time around. And you're singing to Cleopatra, but you're also singing to the castrato in the wings, who's just grinding his teeth in rage and fury as you're one-upping him before he's going to go out and sing the exact same ornaments. It's that kind of world, I think.
Okay. Okay.
But yeah, I love it. Mess around with it. Experiment.
I will, definitely.
Really beautiful.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think now there's a violinist. I can't remember who.
Next up, we have Andrew Gray.
Great.
Hi, I'm Andrew, and I will be playing the fugue from the second sonata for solo violin by Bach. And again, I'll play the first half in interest of time.
Am I unmuted now? Yes. Really, really impressive. That's so that one sounds hard, and it is really hard, and you're doing great. There's so much material here. I'd love to just like take apart little bits of it. One general thought is that sometimes it feels, not always, but sometimes a little bit run-on sentence. So I'm hearing your voicing really clearly, but I'm not always hearing a phrasing that takes breaths. Sometimes the phrase sort of goes on, and I need that little breath just to sort of relax before the next one begins. It's usually at points of harmonic resolution. Can we just take it from anywhere? Let's take it from the top, because I don't know if we're gonna have the same. We'll probably have the same bar lines, but let's just take it from the top. And I'd love to just like find little moments of repose. It's a very like intense, driven performance right now, and I'd love to just like settle it a tiny bit.
Okay.
That felt like a totally different performance already. It's just those little extra breaths between phrases. A few little things. What's happening in measures? Can you play from measure 7? And what I'm really wondering about is the second eighth note of measures 9 and 11. Can you play from measure 10? I want the audience to sort of understand what I'm talking about. Play from measure 7 for a moment.
Okay.
The second, do as you just did. It's from measure 7. Great. So I wish I had the chops to just sit and play this down an octave on cello, and I totally don't. But I'm hearing so. That's coming out as part of a high melodic line, and I'm not hearing that as because that's what those sixteenths are doing. That's not a single melodic line. But here's one phrase, and here's the new one. And the upper voice is doing its own separate thing afterwards. They're all getting sort of elided. And some of this is going to happen in the bow. It might be an articulation or a dynamic difference. And some of it's just going to happen up here. If you're thinking it a little clearer, I think it's going to come out more. Do you see what I mean about the voicing? You might have already been trying to do it and it wasn't quite coming out.
Yeah, I see. I was not doing it enough, so yeah.
Try bringing that out extra. Really show me that second voice, and then revert to the first. It's a dialogue with yourself, as most of these Bach.
Same place?
Yeah, same place.
Okay.
I see. It's actually a technical problem of you're rushing the bottom of the chord. What is that? And I'm losing that. linger long enough on that bass that I can hear that the bass is coming from these 16ths. Sorry, and again, this is just me not being able to sight read this on cello, but try that one more time.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm hearing it a little better now. Some added articulation or dynamic might make a difference at sort of helping bring that out. Keep going. Let's do the next passage, and I just want to point out a few other little things as they might come up. I know we're still limited on time. Great. So I'm hearing that as one long melodic line. The voicing is coming out really nicely right now. In the bass, it's feeling a little bit run-on. And that's another one of these spots I'd love to breathe a little bit. Just to show the sequence that it's groupings of two measure. Yeah, you see what I mean?
Yes.
What I'm hearing is a melodic drive, and that's working really nicely. But I think you can do it with just enough breath to sort of help your audience understand what they're hearing. Can you start from that spot on the E? And then right at that point, you've built up to this huge arrival. I think you can actually linger there longer. Before you begin the theme again, just before you get there, that's a good spot to drive towards, and then just enjoy it for a moment. This is all just it's about, like, individual taste. For my taste, that made a lot more sense. It was much easier to follow what was happening melodically and harmonically. And I felt like I could breathe.
Okay.
I wish we had more time to sort of go through like every passage. I think we probably have to move on. But thank you. It's really a difficult piece, and you sound terrific.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, next we have Wallace.
My name is Wallace Brown, and I will be singing What Power Art Thou from King Arthur, which is a semi-opera which was premiered in 1691. And in this aria, I play the cold genius, which is kind of like a fantasy character who is not very happy to be awake, to say the least.
Bravo. So this, unlike the Handel earlier, this one I'd heard before, and it's amazing. The piano accompaniment that we just heard can't do this justice. This is one of those movements that has the kind of chromaticism and the clashing dissonances that I was talking about earlier with some of the musical examples I played. So great singing. There's you haven't done this one with orchestra, I assume.
I'm going to do this at my college. We were going to do this in the scene show this semester, and it was going to be with the ensemble, but
yeah, well, there's a performance practice that sprung up with this one, and if you go on, I'm sure you've seen it on YouTube with all these performances. It's not piano, but it's strings, and usually, even though it's not marked, it's you. It's very, very short and choppy. I don't know when this came about. My guess is it's been around for a while. The English have these sort of ancient, like Purcell performance practices that go back to like the 18th and 19th centuries when they started reviving this stuff. And what I've often heard is sort of re-articulation, like sort of a glot, like what, ut, pa, oh, were, art, da, ow, who, to sort of go along with that. And I'm wondering whether that's something that you've thought about, or something that you've done, or something that you don't want your strings to do when you do eventually get to work with them.
Well, the way that we looked at it when I was learning it is, obviously we're doing it with the piano, but the piano can't really capture what the strings do. So you listen to ensembles, and they had the strings. They play the note, and then they ornament. They have a little bit of not vibrato, but they kind of small
The resonance. Yeah, you get the resonance, and it comes from what I was saying with Gemignani of vibrating after the note.
Yeah, and then the singer kind of mimics it, but we didn't want to get into doing it in straight tones, and I'm kind of losing all this technique that I worked on. So you have to kind of play this weird game, like still doing this sort of not vibrato, but sort of wobbling up and down without using the core and not singing like straight tones.
Totally. So that's another funny thing about this one is that we've got this weird notation that, as far as I know, no one knows for sure what it means. There's just a bunch of interpretations. Can you actually? I think I don't know if you or I is on everyone's screens right now, but I'm gonna hold mine up, and if you hold yours up, someone will see it. If you look at the very bottom there, you'll see in the vocal line there's these wavy lines. Other composers of this era wrote wavy lines to mean vibrato.
Yeah.
And you're doing that. You're creating this sort of wiggle. It's probably what he meant.
Yeah.
And I like it, but it's worth knowing that that you're following this weird thing that Purcell wrote that we don't quite understand. Could you mess with other articulations? And I think some of the performance practice of this movement might have something to do with Vivaldi's Winter. It's a similar harmonic progression, and we often in this movement do the same thing that we do in the Winter, which is we go panicello with the bow. You can't see my bow right now, but I'm way over the bridge, making this sort of eerie sounds. And I'm wondering how far you can go. This is not like a normal character. And I would say try to sound less pretty and more ghostly.
Okay, I gotcha.
But is there a way to fast forward your thing?
Really long intro.
Yeah.
Okay, let's see. I will get it to.
Yeah. I think. Yeah, less pretty and more otherworldly.
Okay, got it.
Great. One thing it happened just so. First of all, I love your sound quality that you're getting now. I think also you might not have been quite warmed up after sitting there for a while, but you sound much more secure right now. One thing that happened both in the initial performance and now is you're tending to get a little ahead of the beat. And I think this needs to be this incredible, again, not pretty, but really, really shockingly steady and almost unmusical. Basically the exact opposite I was just saying with the on the violin. The text has made me rise unwillingly and slow, everlasting snow. It's how stiff and wondrous old. It's extremely. Don't ever become human.
Okay.
By allowing yourself to drive forward with this bizarre chromaticism. I think the more you speed through it, the more you sort of rush it, the more you've lost something of the power of it. can you try actually like uh, imagine you're on stage in some sort of weird ice
Yeah.
costume and you're literally frozen stiff. And try doing this once in a posture that makes you uncomfortable
Yeah.
because you're so stiff.
Yeah. Okay.
Just one more time, then we'll have to move on, I'm afraid.
All right.
Good. Good. It still got a little ahead, but it had that drama now that I think this one needs. I think it's one of those roles that like you can't sound too nice.
No, it's
Um,
really beyond. It's so unique. I mean, anything
yeah,
in all of opera. It's like maybe the most unusual
yeah.
art role there is.
It's awesome. I don't know this. I know it's not a real opera. It's like a whatever we call it, a quasi opera. It's not a mask. I don't know the whole piece very well, but this aria is amazing, and it was really a pleasure to hear you do it. So bravo. So we'll have one more violin.
Yes, right now we are having Nina, and Nina pre-recorded her Bach. Would you like to hear the Allemande and Sarabande, or just one?
I think we're running a little over, and especially if there are more questions, we might want to do just the Allemande. If no one has had any additional questions, maybe we can do both. But I know we're a little over already, so I don't want to push things.
Okay, I will do the Allemande then.
Okay, great.
One moment, please, and I'll cue that up.
Thank you.
So in the fugue that we heard earlier, we were dealing with this issue of there's a bunch of different voices all happening at once, and we have to sort of make sense of them. And here we've actually got the same thing, and it's just that the different voices are all part of this one single line. We're not playing them as double stops or triple stops, but they're there anyway. They're just sort of hidden in the texture. And I want to start by just making sure you know where those are. It's sort of a melody over a bass, and we need to bring them both out. I'm afraid I'm gonna have to. You're all gonna have to hear me sing for a moment, but. So there's multiple voices in this texture. One of them is you've got this melodic line, and then you've got this bass.
Yes.
And you have to be your own bass, and you have to somehow distinguish that bass from the melody. Can you start it one more time and bring out? Good. I heard that. No, that was fine. I heard it much better at the beginning. Sorry. I think your bowing is getting in the way of bringing it out. It's not that you have to change the bowing, but I heard it's down, and so which is your bass note, that's getting buried in this in slur. Can you try something? It's not about it's changing the bowing. It's about changing the way that you're thinking of it, so that is its own line below everything.
Yes.
You know, one thing that's also getting in the way, you're doing this beautiful romantic portamento. I'm exaggerating. You don't. It's not vulgar like I just made it. But it's connecting the melodic line above to this bass note below, and we have to somehow disconnect those two if we're going to hear that bass as its own distinct thing. If we slur it like that and connect it with the left hand, we'll never hear it as anything other than melody. Try something else.
From beginning, correct?
Yeah. Yes. So that time I really heard a clear melody over bass. You might not like what comes out. This is, I think this is actually less a Baroque versus modern thing. This is more of just sort of a thinking melodically versus thinking contrapuntally thing. And I tend to always be feeling this contrapuntally and harmonically. A lot of players play this beautifully as one melodic line. And it's not that there's anything wrong with that, but I sort of want to always hear it the other way first and just see if that's it. Can you go on and sort of be feeling that? So we've got that D in. We got this rising melodic line in the bass that I think you can bring out.
From the beginning again, or from?
Yeah, you can go from.
Do you want me to go on?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, no, that was great. For my taste, that's a much more satisfying way to listen to this. And again, it really is about taste. But I can tell you've already done some thinking about this because you just like sort of launched yourself right into that mode of thinking contrapuntally, and it worked really well all the way through, even with the stuff that I hadn't said anything about. So that's great. How are we doing on time? I know we're running over. Can you go on just from right where you left off, and we'll see if anything else leaps out at me.
Yes.
Really good. You'll find more opportunities to do this sort of voicing thing throughout. Right where you started. You'll find I have no idea if that's how I would want to do it if I were actually learning this for performance, but you'll find ways to make this less of one long melodic thing and more of two voices sort of in dialogue. They're all over the place throughout these movements that just seem to be one melodic line. So I would say search for them and mess around with them. And it's not totally, it's not objective as to where they are and how to bring them out, but mess with it.
Right, yes, of course.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. So I think that was our last. I don't know if there are any more questions. I know I've run a little over and I don't want to hold people too late, but I'm happy to chat for a few more minutes if anyone has any questions.
We don't have any questions right now, but I would love to pose another one just in case anyone wants to frantically quickly type. What would you advise those of us who are interested in performing Baroque music and want to honor some of the historical practices? What would you say are some of the most common mistakes you hear in budding musicians when they try to play Baroque music?
That's a great question. So most of my experience and most of my knowledge is about string playing, and I came to this as a modern player who just sort of loved the sound world and wanted to get into it. I was already in my late 20s before I started doing this at all, and what I find is that there's a couple of sort of, they're not rules, they're principles. Follow the meter. Always look and see what meter you're in, unless there's a dance that deliberately sort of offsets the meter, like a gavotte, for instance, or sometimes a sarabande with a strong beat too. You're usually going to want to drive towards the downbeat. And if you're a string player, the downbeat is always going to be on the down bow. There's exceptions, but make the exceptions really deliberate. Muffat talked about the rule of down bow. Basically, anytime you're on a strong beat, take it on a down bow. And it's less about being melodic than about being dance-like. All Baroque music is sort of based around the dance. So the less sustained you are and the more sort of pokey with the bow you are. I'm not sure how pokey would translate to a singer or a wind instrument. So phrasing with the meter is one thing, and the composers usually do you this big favor, and they set the harmony change to happen at that metric change. You're not going to have a lot of harmony changes off the beat when you're not on an important beat. They're usually going to happen at that strong beat. Figure out whether that harmony change is tension or resolution. Even if you don't have the theory background to determine specifically the kind of chord, you'll be able to hear whether it's a tension chord or a resolution chord and sort of phrase accordingly. But generally, we're going to drive towards these strong beats. And if it's a tension chord, bring it out a lot. And if it's a resolution chord, still bring it out a little, because the meter is what's most important, these strong beats. That's sort of Baroque string bowing in a little 30-second intro.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, it was such a pleasure to have you. I don't see any more questions. Bravo to all of our participants who performed tonight. And thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. It's really, really fascinating, especially for our participants who clearly very interested in Baroque music.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's really been a pleasure. Thanks to Yehuda and the High Peaks Festival. It's been great. And thanks to the performers.
Excellent. So I actually wanted to draw attention. We have some really exciting events coming this weekend. We have 2 nights of Moonlight Sonata concerts, and those are at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And those can be found on the Close Encounters with Music YouTube page. Our concerts are going to be on YouTube. And what I'm actually going to do is our Saturday concert is already scheduled, but it will be premiering at the 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And in the chat, I'm going to put a link to that YouTube video. And what you guys can do is you can access that link and you can click the remind me button or set a reminder button. It looks like a bell, and you will get a notification when our concert starts streaming. We're featuring faculty performances, alumni, and also current student performances. So there's one on Saturday night, one on Sunday night, also 7:30 p.m. Eastern Standard on YouTube. For Zoom, we are having a makeup artist give a talk on Sunday, and she's going to be talking about branding and imagery in the art industry. And I will be putting a link for all of our calendar events also in the chat. So make sure you sign up for all of those events. Thank you so much for joining tonight, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your Friday. Have a good night from those of us here at High Peaks Virtual Music Festival.